I'm Perry and welcome to the Literary Knitterary. So today I wanted to drop by for a quick chat about my 2020 book and reading goals and how they're going so far now that we're about pretty much a third of the way through the year. I know it's not really the season for these kinds of videos, but obviously I wasn't on YouTube in December and January, so I figured better late than never. I really love everything like goal setting related projects and things like that. I didn't really set too many specific reading goals for myself in 2020 because of where I am in my reading journey. So I only started tracking my reading in 2016. So January 1st, 2016 basically is when I started tracking my reading, which was the second half of my freshman year of college. So until 2020, all of the years that I have data about my reading, so 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019, I was in school for at least part of those years. 2019, I was only in school for the first 4 months, January through April, and then I graduated. But then I spent the next 6 months hiking the Appalachian Trail, which meant that my access to books and the sort of amount of time that I had to read them was just a little bit different than theoretically it will be for the rest of my non-through hiking life. So between finishing up my extremely busy spring semester senior year and hiking the AT, those are two pretty huge confounding variables if you're trying to establish a baseline for what your post-school reading life is going to look like. But 2020 theoretically was the year that I was going to do that. So 2020 was going to be the year that I found out how much and what kinds of things I like to read without any sort of extenuating circumstances. I don't want to talk about the coronavirus, but to some extent that is an extenuating circumstance because, as many people do, I have a lot more free time right now than someone who likes to be as busy as I usually like to be would normally have. So as far as establishing a baseline, I don't know if 2020 is going to be the year either, but that attitude was part of what I was going for when I was making my reading goals at the end of December. So without further ado, let's have a chat about the goals themselves and how I'm doing so far. So goal number one was, as I think it is for a lot of people, my like Goodreads reading challenge goal, the number of books that I planned or aspired to read in 2020. In 2019, with all of the extenuating circumstances that we already discussed, I read 65 books. Every year that I've tracked my reading so far, I've read a little bit more than the year before, but I try to keep my goals at a very modest improvement, just because, you know, setting attainable goals is the name of the game. So reading 65 books is a little more than 1 book a week, or like a little more than 5 books a month. I chose to raise my goal to 78 books for 2020. 78 books is what you get if you read a book and a half or a week, or like 6.5 books a month, which is kind of a weird number, I know, but it felt like the right amount to sort of push myself a little bit, but not put undue pressure on myself, especially since I didn't know what my life was going to look like in a lot of other aspects. So 78 books was my Goodreads goal. I fully expect at this point to blow that goal out of the water, as much as number of books is a rather arbitrary way to measure reading because it doesn't take into account quality, it doesn't take into account enjoyment, and it doesn't even take into account things like the length of the book. So it's not a perfect metric by any means, but it is sort of central to the way a lot of people structure their reading lives, and it's something I've been having fun with for the past 4 years. But yeah, so as of right now, as of filming this today, on April 24th, 2020, I have completed 47 individual books, or 48 readings of books. There was 1 book so far in 2020 that I finished and then started immediately again from the beginning and read through a second time. So if you count rereads, 48 books, but since it was back to back, it almost feels like one reading experience. So if you just count individual book-like objects, 47 books. So obviously I am ahead of the game. All of that ahead of the game-ness has come from March and April. January and February I was pretty much right on track, even a little behind. But then March I worked in a bookstore, which had me constantly jazzed to read all the time. And April I've been in my apartment. So yeah, as far as the sheer number of books, I'm really pleasantly surprised with how that goal is going. My second sub-goal was to read 25 new-to-me plays, and I am doing way worse on that goal, mostly due to issues of access and also just me not paying close enough attention to the goal itself. So 25 plays in a year is roughly 1 play every 2 weeks. Unfortunately, I have only read 4 plays, which means that I'm about 2 months behind. Of all those 4 plays, only 1 was actually good, which I think was part of the reason that I had a hard time accumulating momentum. Currently at 4 of the 25 plays that I had hoped to read this year, which definitely means that that is a goal I'm going to have to devote additional focus to going forwards. Plays can be a little harder to get for free or for low cost than other things, and I'm not a person who likes to spend a lot of money on books. The library is my #1 source of books to read. The physical library collections are closed, and rightly so. So I'm just relying on what's on Libby, which means that, like, even if my local library has a really strong poetry or drama collection in physical copy, they often don't have as strong of a play or poetry collection or other obscure things on Libby, which is not their fault. I understand that they need to, like, spend their money wisely. It's just, you know, personally inconvenient for me. I have to find some way to source plays that isn't going to cost me a lot of money. I did sign up for New Play Exchange, which I'll do a video talking about at some point once I've explored it further. But any way you slice it, I need to devote a little more attention to that goal because I, again, have only read 4 of the 25 plays that I'm hoping to read in 2020. All right, next we're going to talk about sort of categories of books that I was hoping to read in order to improve other areas of my life. So basically, I was sitting down to make New Year's resolutions, and I was like, I don't even know what goals to set because there are some areas that I know so little about, again, as a recent college graduate. So there are 4 books in this category, and of those 4 prompts, I have read 2 books that satisfy. So my first goal was to read a personal finance book because money scares me and I don't understand it. So goal number 1 was to read a personal finance book, and I have done that. I read the money book for The Young, Broke and Fabulous, or The Young, Fabulous and Broke, I never get it right, by Suze Orman. This was pretty good. I finished it in April, so you'll see a forthcoming review in my April wrap-up. It was pretty good. My only real quibble with it is that it's a little out of date. My next prompt was to read a personal finance book specifically for freelancers because that's the direction I'm hoping to take my career in, and I understand that some things are different. I have not done that yet. My third prompt was to read a book on habit formation, how to make and stick to good habits and how to break bad habits, and I would say I have accomplished that this year. I read a book called The Power of Habits by Charles Duhigg. This will also be reviewed in my forthcoming April wrap-up. And then my fourth and final prompt in this sort of family of goals was to read a low-waste book, a book on reducing the amount of waste that your household produces, and I have not done that yet, so it's something to look forward to for the next 2/3 of 2020. The last strictly reading goal I want to talk about is a project that I have not started at all yet, but heading into 2020, I was sort of jazzed about the new decade. Jazzed? That won't be funny until I explain the project. Heading into 2020, I was really excited to be in the 2020s, you know, and I was feeling the whole, like, yes, let's bring back Art Deco, let's bring back flappers, let's bring back unions. What a great theme for a decade. And I started looking through, like, lists of classics from the 20s or, like, books set in the 20s, and I was like, no, you know what I want to do is I want to make this, like, I don't want to just read one book. I want to do, like, a project where, to celebrate the advent of the 2020s, the beginning of the 2020s, I'm going to ring the decade in by reading one book published specifically in every year of the decade of the 1920s. So 1920 through 1929, we're going to try to read a book, one book from each of those years. Haven't done anything towards that goal yet. So that could be something to look out for on future TBRs, is me working towards that goal, because I am excited about it. There's definitely a greater breadth of literature from that time than I've personally studied or read. So I'm going to cover that gap in the rest of 2020. And then the last sort of directly bookish goal that I wanted to talk about was that I put down in my list of New Year's resolutions, write 20 reviews, or actually I think I wrote down review 20 books. And I was not very specific about this, which is why it's good to do goal check-ins, because now I look at that and I'm like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that when I finish a book, I jot down a few notes in a Goodreads review? Or does that mean writing out a full-length review that's polished and well-crafted and well-organized enough that I would feel comfortable using it as a writing sample or submitting it to an independent website? Or did I even mean write 20 reviews that are published somewhere other than my own Goodreads page? It's impossible to know. But I would say that I actually feel like I have made significant progress towards this goal, because I've started reviewing on Goodreads without feeling like I need to polish those reviews or talk about every single aspect of the book that stood out to me, every single problem I might have noticed, every single impression I've had. Instead, I've started feeling comfortable using Goodreads as a tool to capture my impressions right after I finish a book, to take notes on anything I don't want to forget, almost sort of using it more like social media than like a place to store a writing portfolio, which is definitely what it is. That's definitely, I think, how most people use it and how you're supposed to use it. So counting any review that's longer than one sentence and sort of makes an attempt to capture my thoughts of the book as a whole. So not just, I liked this, or like this was brilliant, or like what if this was a movie. Discounting those reviews, I've written 14 or 15 reasonably comprehensive reviews on Goodreads, which may not sound like a lot, but whereas before this year, writing a review on Goodreads was very much the exception rather than the rule, and it's only really become more of the rule in April, I would say, but that's what a goal is about progress. So I would say that's something that I feel like I'm making progress on, is feeling comfortable sharing my unfinished thoughts on a book, rather than hiding behind a pseudo-academic essay, and not letting myself put it up anywhere until it's polished and perfect. Because I don't demand that of the people whose reviews I follow and enjoy. I'm just interested in their experience of the book. So I think that decreasing the formality but increasing the quantity of book reviews that I'm doing is definitely super helpful, especially since it's sort of helping me codify my thoughts about books and remember my thoughts about books. I just think it's going to help with this whole enterprise going forward. And then if I need to write a really polished review, I have a skeleton that already exists in my Goodreads review, and then I can take it, expand on points that I need to expand on, rearrange things so that it flows nicely, and then have a really nice, neat, polished thing that I can use for whatever I want. But when I've just finished a book lying in bed and it's 11:15, I don't need to write a beautiful masterpiece of literary criticism. I can just write down the things that I am thinking about and don't want to forget. So I'd say that's something I'm definitely making progress on, and if we do like a midterm goals review, maybe I'll refine what I meant by review 20 books. Be sure, kids, when you're setting your goals, that you set specific goals, or you'll be confused, like me. So yeah, that should be all for today. It's a quick rundown of my 2020 bookish goals, and where I sort of stand in relation to them. I feel like I'm doing pretty good, although there's definitely some things that require a little bit more of my focus, but that's why you do goal check-ins. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite 2020 reading goal is, or if there are any that you've completed so far. I would love to know. And if you had a good time, I hope you will consider subscribing. I hope you're staying happy, healthy, and safe, and I hope that somewhere there is a great book waiting for you. Bye.